welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. I'm actually not entirely sure. Since this is a type of advice/memoir based book, I will not necessarily be doing a typical summary. Instead, I will just give an overview and then I will talk about some of my thoughts and how I think this book addressed the issues of anti-racism and racism. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi is a book discussing racism in individual and systemic ways to actively fight racism. Kendi uses some personal stories and some bits of memoir to explore his own anti-racist journey, as well as utilizing historical events to illustrate many of the ideas presented within his book. The book chapters are divided according to various types of discrimination with titles such as ethnicity, biology, power, class, sexuality, and gender. Each chapter begins with definitions of anti-racism and racism within those specific contexts, which I think is really helpful before reading those chapters. He also explores racism in an intersectional way. So he looks at how it relates to class, sexuality, gender, and even internalized racism. Kendi himself actually discusses extensively his own internalized racism and many of his own racist beliefs that he has had to overcome over the years. So I think that actually helps this remain a really honest and relatable resource for people confronting their own discrimination, whether internalized or externalized. I just think that that's a really honest and open way to approach it, because the reality is we all hold some of that. We've been taught to hold some of that. We have systems in place that hold that. So I really liked how honest he was about his own anti-racist journey and his own struggles with various forms of internalized and externalized racism. My thoughts on this book are generally positive, and I enjoyed reading it and did find it to be an incredibly helpful tool, honestly, to confront my own prejudices, past and current. I think that this book's strongest attributes are Kendi's honest, raw, and real writing style, as well as the necessary self-reflection that is required of the reader. The book is also filled with the author's own self-reflection, so it's not just a book that's saying this is how you can be better, it's a book saying this is how I got better, and this is how I improved some of my outlooks. I would imagine that a really big and common criticism of this book is that it defines actions as either racist or anti-racist, which can come across as very black and white thinking and could seem potentially very harsh to a lot of readers. It seemingly perpetuates the rather simplistic ideas of good and evil actions, perhaps ignoring some of the middle ground. However, Kendi does not only consider racist and anti-racist ideas within his book, he actually openly discusses assimilationist middle ground where a lot of well-intentioned yet still racist ideas live. When Kendi talks about this assimilationist middle ground, this is very akin to the colorblind mentality, which is so often heard as a type of post-racist or post-racial view. This is well-intentioned, though still perpetuating the idea that our systems are inherently equal and equitable, which is simply not true. I think that in many ways, this book is very reminiscent of the famous quote, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." I believe that this is the main idea that Kendi is expressing within this book. If you claim to simply be not racist, you are really claiming to be neutral in an ongoing situation of injustice. It is in this main idea, I think, where the book holds most of its power and most of its call to action in a lot of ways. I think that Kendi does a really good job highlighting many of the ways in which systemic racism occurs, including some of the more obvious or overt ways, such as the criminal justice system, as well as some of the more insidious ways, such as voter suppression and standardized testing. I think that the standardized testing section of this book was actually probably my favorite portion. As someone who's worked in education, I think that standardized testing has been problematic for a long time, but I didn't really realize the extent of it, and I found that that was a really eye-opening section and probably my favorite part of the entire book. Kendi talks about how really these systems of testing are not only outdated, but we have become so reliant on them as the only measure of intelligence and the only measure of achievement, which is, again, simply not true. There are other ways to measure intelligence and achievement, and realistically, standardized tests are actually just measuring how good you are at taking standardized tests. I really like one of his quotes regarding testing and achievement on page 103, and in this he says, "What if we measured intellect by an individual's desire to know? What if we realized the best way to ensure an effective educational system is not by standardizing our curricula and tests, but by standardizing the opportunities available to all students?" I really like that quote from Kendi because I think that it highlights the most important things that educators should be focused on, and that is giving all children the resources that they need in order to succeed. And I feel a standardized testing rant coming on. I feel it coming on, but I'm not gonna let it. So within his book, the social and historical commentary creates a fairly well-rounded understanding of the ways that inequality and inequity are quite literally written and woven into the framework of our society. This is why Kendi argues that being not racist is simply not enough. It is necessary to actively take a stance against that discriminatory status quo. He doesn't just use the entire book to say, be anti-racist, and then not give you any guidance as to how to move forward, though. He does end with the last few chapters discussing his fight against cancer and how it parallels his fight against racism, both on a personal level and on a larger level. He ultimately leaves the reader with concrete steps toward anti-racism and a tangible action plan that you can take. The simplest and most basic of these steps is uncovering racist policies that cause racial inequity. I believe that as an ordinary person reading this book, this is the single greatest takeaway from his call to action. Once you understand the depth of racist policy, you can actually vote and take action against it. But until you understand that, you're probably not really going to understand what it means to be anti-racist. Kendi does use a lot of historical, sociological, and even scientific data to back up his claims. So I do think that this is, generally speaking, a pretty thoughtfully researched book, and it is clearly a passion project of his, and I think a really good book for a lot of people to read. Is it perfect? No, but does it start a necessary conversation through honesty and information? Yes. I will say from a reading standpoint, I loved the way that this book was. I really enjoyed the way that he wove his own personal narrative in with a lot of the sociological and historical data. To me, that felt like a really easy read. I had no trouble breezing through it. I could understand, though, if you aren't really big into statistics, there's a few portions that might come off a little bit dry to you. It may be a little bit textbooky. For me, his inclusion of his own personal journey helps balance that out really, really well. But for some people, that may not be enough to balance it. So definitely something to keep in mind before reading this book. Overall, I definitely enjoyed this book, and I think it is generally a really good resource and a really good tool. I would absolutely recommend it to other people. Let me know if this is a book that you have read or are interested in reading down below. I would definitely love to get a respectful discussion going, but that is just about all I have to say about this. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.